This video is going to tell you a little bit on how to do scratch boards. So first you're going to start with an image of what it is that you want to use as a guide. Then you're going to want to find any value changes, shapes, stuff like that to kind of give you a guide. So if you notice how I do this, I like to use marker. I'm not paying attention to lots of little details by any means, and I'm just outlining general actual shapes. So like I have my antlers here that I'm just going to outline those, but then I pay attention to those little value changes. So like if I have a highlight, I'm going to outline my highlight. If I'm going to have a shadow, I'm going to outline my shadow. And by doing that, that just allows so I don't have to think about it when I'm doing my final project, right? It gives me a guide so I don't have to guess, and that way everything stays accurate. Now, once you finish getting all of the lines drawn that you are going to be needing, then you are ready to move on to this next step. You are always able to add more lines as necessary. So I always tape my papers together, and you want to have them against a light box, a window, something so that you can see through it a little bit easier. And then you take a pencil and you just trace where those marker outlines are. Can you do this without the marker outlines? Absolutely. Marker outlines just make it a little bit more obvious as to where you need to do your tracings. So if you notice, the tape holds my papers together in place so they don't shift at all, so they can stay accurate, and that way I can flip up my paper to make sure that I have all lines there as needed. If I find that I need to add some more lines in there, I can always add those in after as well, and that's kind of what this point is for. Now, once you have all of your guidelines drawn out, then I like to quarter my page, so then that way I can practice 4 different line techniques. Since you can't blend, you test all your different line techniques, see what works, see what doesn't work, see if you want to do a combination of them. That's really what this is for, is really kind of just to test it out to make sure that you're ready to do your final. Along with these line techniques, you want to make sure that you're practicing on an actual scratch board, since it is a totally different thing than pencil and paper. So you want to make sure you can practice making light areas and dark areas and just different techniques for your project. And then you are ready to start your final. So now we are going to transfer our image to our actual scratch board. There's different ways of doing this, but this is one way that I have found that works out well. So you take a graphite stick and you just shade the back of your image. You can do this with a regular pencil. Some people do this with like a white chalk. Like I said, different techniques. You're going to find out what works best for you. But you cover the entire back side, and then from there, you end up putting your image back on top of your scratch board. Make sure that it's lined up with where you want it. If you want it centered, off-centered, whatever, make sure it's there. I like to, once again, tape it in place. And then you just take a pencil with a medium pressure. You don't want to push too hard because otherwise it makes indents. And then you just transfer all of your marker lines onto the scratch board. And if you're using a good medium pressure, not too light, not too heavy, it should transfer the graphite onto your scratch board. So now you have it as a guide, and you can look and pay attention to where those highlights are, and then you start scratching. So if you remember, you need to make sure that you're using just lines when you're doing this. You're not going to be able to use this like a regular pencil. So this is why we practiced the paper first, as well as on the scratch paper. I like to focus on those highlights, find those bright areas, and kind of build those up to kind of help define some of those shapes. I also like to kind of go through if I want to blend. You can see I'm doing these little lines to kind of help blend from one section to the other. And then this area is a little bit darker, so I need to make sure that I'm spacing out my lines. I wanted to create a little bit more of a fur texture, so therefore I'm using those hatching. Some are longer, some are smaller. It kind of depends on the area, but I kind of change up the direction kind of depending on what my photo looks like. Some are crossing, some are not crossing. So this is why we did that practice. See what you like, see what you don't like, but work carefully and make sure that you're having contrast between those areas to make sure that you're creating that definition between each shape. Keep working on adding in different textures to, once again, help define spaces, but also just to create that interest in there. And once you kind of have a foundation of values throughout to kind of have as a guide, then you just keep building it up, keep adding textures, pay attention to subtleties throughout the project, and then make sure that those highlights are really popping and kind of keep building up from there. One thing you might notice here is that my antlers are darker, so I want them to stay darker, but they also need to pop against the background. So you can kind of see I started making this little halo effect to really allow that deer to pop out. So sometimes you might have to change up the values from your image to make sure that your project pieces actually pop out, and then you are good to go. Good luck.